FanDuel has set the over-under win total for Utah at 9.5. Will Utah go over or under? Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcasts. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes today. And our show of Locked On Utes is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. They help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's all caps, no spaces, Locked On College. Terms and conditions do apply. My name is JT Wistricll, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department, and riding solo on today's show, and excited to talk about a few things, particularly the win total for Utah. Gonna also want to talk about if this Utah team can get rid of some of the road game demons that have haunted them in the past, and a fun thing on winning championships and just that feeling that we've been able to experience at Utah fans that I was reminded of a little bit last night. No, my Timberwolves, even though I'm decked out in Minnesota stuff, didn't win a championship, but the feeling reminded me of that. So I want to talk a little bit about that feeling at the very end, reminding what it was like when Utah won their Pac-12 championships. But let's start with Utah. So FanDuel put out the Utah win total, as many of the gambling sites have done, and they set the over-under or 9.5. And I'll just say it right away. I would go over with this. I think Utah is going to be a 10-11 win regular season team come this fall. I really believe in this team, in this roster. And yeah, I'll talk about the roster first, then we'll bounce around the schedule, right? The number one thing I look at when I look at this Utah team is and any team, right? Like the most important position on the field is quarterback. I believe in Cam Rising. I understand there's some concerns, right? Like we had Colin on last week, more of life and football, and he mentioned he left Cam off his Big 12 QB rankings because Cam's wasn't healthy last year, so there's some concern there. I understand that, but also Cam looked pretty good in the spring game, and I'm not trying to overreact to a spring game, but it just looked healthy. So I understand there's concerns of like, hey, he's going to get hit, and that a spring game doesn't mimic an actual game, of course, but obviously what he did in spring can only be taken as a positive sign. So that's where I feel encouraged about Cam's health and feel confident in him recapturing and getting back to his form, right? So number one, you got the quarterback in place too, and maybe, 1A, 1B quarterback. How about just also the culture in place in general? When you're looking at a team, you want a team with a winning culture and pedigree, because it's just like, they understand how to win, what it takes to win. So when they have pieces to replace, like Utah does in the secondary, you believe they're going to find a way to replace those pieces successfully, because that's what they've always done, because they've won in the past. They continue to win, and you trust in that the coaching staff and the players are going to put out there on the field. And that's definitely the case with this Utah secondary. Same thing with the Utah offensive line, right? I've said this won't be the best Utah offensive line we've seen in a few years, but I'm hoping it's an improvement from last year. And I think it'll be a slight improvement too. The Utah offensive line was solid last year too. I don't think this is going to be the best offensive line in the country, but I still think it'll be one of the better ones in the Big 12. Jim Harding's a good coach. You got a lot of 4-star recruits that we've heard good things about in camp. Once again, step in the right direction, and you trust the coaching in place. So you feel confident in that group to figure it out as well. So even the offensive line, right? And then let's talk about things we feel amazing about. How about Utah's tight end room? I mean, it's completely stacked. The wide receiver group is the best we've had on paper in a long time. You have a proven 1,000-yard receiver on the outside for Cam Rising. I know some people are concerned about the running backs. I think it's I still think it's a nice room overall. I understand there's not a Zach Moss, but I mean, even last year, right? Like Jaquin and Jackson, we had high hopes for, but he battled injuries and wasn't able to be that Zach Moss. And Utah used to use a backfield by committee and had a lot of success, right? Jalen Glover's got a lot of experience. Mekhi Bernard's been a part of a lot of success with this Utah team. How about Anthony Woods is coming off a 1,000-yard season? I understand it's in the Big Sky. Shout out Big Sky. But it was still like he produced really well there, and he's earned the opportunity to step up there. And so I think he's going to do well, and he's not the only guy they're relying on. Plus a ton of 4-star talents that I believe are going to have an opportunity to see the field this fall or very soon, because they're pushing the guys ahead of them. So you feel good about the running back room. I didn't mention the front seven yet. They're only the best front seven in the Big 12 and maybe one of the best front sevens in college football. I mean, they lost one major contributor, technically two, if we want to say Leavani Dumuni already being ruled out for the season-ending injury. The other major contributor, of course, being Jonah Ellis, who's now off to the NFL. But when you look at this defensive line in the front, like the linebacking core, it's stacked with returning talent. And as I've said before, too, the run defense shouldn't be affected by the absence of Jonah Ellis too much, because I think Connor O'Toole and Van Fillinger did a phenomenal job run defense. The pass rush we have questions about, but Kyle Whittingham said Connor O'Toole was the best pass rusher coming into last season. So hopefully that's the guy who's going to be this coming fall. I'm curious to see what level he reaches and looks like there. So that's this roster, and obviously the coaching. Andy Ludwig and Cam Rising have a great rapport. When Cam was last healthy, this offense averaged 38 points per game. I believe it was 38 or 36 back in 2022. And obviously this Utah defense coming off another really strong campaign, top 5 run defense. And I expect them to be elite again. We know what Morgan Scalley does there. And Kyle Whittingham's team always seems to produce. They always seem to win. Hence why so many members of the media, like a Joe Klatt, are extremely high on Utah, because they always win. And there's so much returning talent. Whenever you have returners, you're going to do really good things. So that's the first thing about why I'm high on this Utah team. And then let's talk about the other part of this is the schedule. When you're talking about, okay, how are they going to get over 9.5 wins? That means you can only lose 2 games. Well, and we'll do a schedule video coming up again here soon. It's been a little bit since we've gone game by game and predicting, and that's something I really enjoy doing. So I want to do that again. But let's just scan over the schedule quickly. The first 3 weeks of the season, I don't see a loss. You're not losing to Southern Utah. Sorry, friend of the show, Spencer McLaughlin, voice of the Thunderbirds. You're not losing to a Baylor team at home. We beat Baylor on the road last year, and our quarterback situation is a mess. And I understand they're a mess too, but if a Baylor fan has somehow made his way over to this video, let's not forget, and this is a big theme throughout this entire thing, whenever you're talking about Utah winning in the regular season, Utah does not lose at home. The exception to that since 2018 is Bo Nix, a top 15 pick, a Oregon team that was one Pac-12 championship short because they lost out to Washington, from going to the college football playoff. The teams that have come close are the USCs of the world. You mean a Heisman Trophy winner? It takes a lot to come in and beat Utah, especially elite quarterback play, something that right now it doesn't look like Baylor has. And Utah's clearly better than Utah State. Excited for the return game for Bryson Barnes. I think there's a lot of fun things there. Oklahoma State one, that's a big question mark there. I feel confident in Utah there, but that's something we'll talk about in the next segment when we're talking about those big road games, right? You get Arizona at home. I think that's big. Fafita's really good. There's a chance Arizona could still beat Utah, even though they lost a lot of transfer talent. Anytime the teams that have beaten this Utah team have been elite quarterbacks, right? Usually don't see a team with a meh quarterback situation beat this Utah team, because in order to beat a really good defense, you got to make those high pressure and just really high degree of difficulty throws. Fafita's the guy who can do that. So that's where I look at him and see that one could be a tough game too. Arizona State, not one I'm too worried about. TCU, it's at home. So yet again, and TCU's not supposed to be great either. Same thing with Houston, BYU. Some of these opponents, you just look at it and you're like, Utah's clearly the better team. These other teams have huge, major roster questions. Colorado, it's on the road. Shedeur Sanders, he'll be the best quarterback on the field. There's a chance that could be interesting. Utah clearly has a better roster than Colorado, especially up front. And even though the offensive line should be better, I still think they might struggle to protect Shedeur against the front seven, the caliber of Utah. Then Iowa State and UCF, excuse me. Those are solid, really good teams. Utah is clearly better. Maybe UCF in one of the polls has been ranked in the top 25. There's a reason Utah's schedule has been listed as one of the easiest. There's not a ton of really high degree of difficult games on there. So I think this Utah team is in for a really strong season. When I've went through and predicted their schedule in the past, I've gone 11-1. And if you want to say 10-2, sure. There's always a way they could go 9-3 because they have in the past, but the schedule is weaker this year and the team is really strong. I don't see it. But the reason that Utah has struggled in the past is because they've come up short in some of the really big road games. So is that going to be the case in 2024? That's what I want to talk about in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you all about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes. It's our friends at LinkedIn Talent Solutions. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals in your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They have a vast network that helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're simply looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, they might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They have a feature they just launched that helps you write job descriptions, making the process that much faster. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege, all caps, no spaces, to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All righty. Come back in this one. Let's go back and talk about this Utah win total, right? 9.5. Where are you feeling the lean? I already said I would go with the over. But if there's a reason to be concerned about going over, it's Utah's recent history of struggling in some big road games. Let's go back to 2022 post Cam Rising. Yes, they lost to San Diego State. Yes, they lost to BYU. That was before Cam Rising. So let's talk about in the Cam Rising era of Utah football. They lost to Oregon State that year. Really tough place to play, and credit the Beavers for showing up, and Utah wasn't able to get it done that game. So that's a tough road game that they lost there. Then fast forward to 2022, as I'm trying to get my numbers and math straight. That was the year we lost at Oregon, right? Cam was coming off an injury, probably the worst game he's ever played. I think he had 3 interceptions, some really bad misses in a few occasions. So you lost that one. UCLA, you lost to Dante Moore in that spot too. And I think there was a third game they lost in that regular season, but I might be, I'm sure there was another road game, but either way. So those are the two big ones that jump out that season. And then even last far, despite all the injuries, the QBs Utah lost to were Fafita on the road. You lost to Yabonix at home, Michael Penix on the road being another one. And once again, I'm forgetting Utah's fourth. There was another loss for Oregon State, and then you lost to Oregon State. And even if you don't love DJU, those are all really good quarterbacks. Oregon State's the very first year that the Utah lost to them back in 22. I don't remember him, or 21. I don't remember him being outstanding, but Oregon State is a very, very tough place to play. So overall, by and large, to beat this recent iteration of Utah football with Cam Rising, you need a really good quarterback in order to do so, or a really tough environment. And that's where Oklahoma State can come into play. Stillwater, it's going to be rocking. There will be a great crowd there. I think that'll be a lot of fun. And I think that's definitely one Utah could lose, because if we're looking at the big road games on their schedule, honestly, it's the toughest game on Utah's schedule to me. And it's not really close at the moment. It's clearly that Oklahoma State game. The UCF one at the end of the year could become a little more interesting, but it's not. And maybe Colorado is the other one I mentioned, just in terms of like, Shedeur is really good. I think he's genuinely going to have a chance to be up there for Heisman talk like that. When I talk about Shedeur, and I've mentioned before, I think he's got a chance to be the first overall pick in next year's NFL draft. I don't say that because all I do is follow the Dion hype, right? I say that because I watched him last fall and was really impressed with what he did behind a really poor offensive line. So all I'm saying is, if they take a step in the right direction, I think they are a team that's capable of upsetting Utah, just like they nearly upset that Arizona team last year that was running through everyone in the Pac-12 late in the season. Why they almost beat that Arizona team? Because Shedeur and how good he is. And they have some really strong receiving options out there too. So whenever you got a quarterback like that, can make things interesting. It doesn't have a quarterback like that though. It's Oklahoma State. Alan Bowman is not a Shedeur Sanders level quarterback. I do not think he's worthy of being one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the Big 12. I talked about that on my show last week with Colin. I'm not a believer in Moore. Not a believer in Bowman, because Bowman is a guy, he had 14 interceptions last year, and that is just way too high. And his team also got blown out in some games. They got blown out 45-3 by UCF at home. You can't find a loss that bad for Utah in the Pac-12 era with Cam Rising, right? So that's where it's just, and I know the Oregon game wasn't great, but also that's a little different circumstances. Losing to a Heisman quarterback, a future top 15 pick, and a really dang good nearly college football playoff team, and a UCF team that I'm pretty sure finished 6-6, if I remember correctly. So that's where, to me, that's totally different. But I do believe this Utah team is going to be able to conquer those road issues they've had in the past, simply because the matchups to me don't scare me as much as they do. The Utah maybe plays one. I think Shedeur will be a first-round pick after this season. I think very high, but there's a chance he could stumble a little bit from that. He's the only first-round quarterback that Utah will see on their schedule this year. That's no shade to an Iowa State or some of these other teams like that, but they don't have quarterbacks to that level, and that's what it takes to beat Utah. Oklahoma State doesn't have that guy. Oklahoma State's strength is their run game. Ollie Gordon in that offensive line. Utah's strength is their run defense, and I think Utah's going to have success packing the box, shutting Gordon down, and I expect Utah's corners to be able to hold up against the Cowboys receivers. So it's going to be a great matchup to see if that actually comes to fruition. And then the other way, yeah, the Cowboys have a strong defense, but I trust Cam Rising. I think that this is a big statement game for Utah earlier in the season. And I really believe they're going to announce their presence in the Big 12 by going in and beating the team that made their conference championship game, that did not win their conference championship game because Texas did, but that was at least in like the farthest you can make it in before being bounced from just making it to a conference championship game. So I do think that Utah's going to get over the Oklahoma State one. And then they've cleared their biggest road hurdle. As for some of these other games on here, the road ones in particular, they're beating Arizona State. They're beating Houston, which is clearly better than those teams. Obviously beating Utah State too. Colorado, once again, Shedeur, there's a chance you could upset Utah and make it interesting. Utah is clearly a better top to bottom roster. I think Utah can and should win that game against the Buffs. I think it will be a little closer than people expect. I don't expect us to roll in there and beat them 45-3. Like last year, they got demolished by Oregon. I don't expect that to happen to Colorado this year because I think their roster is a little better, but I do expect them to lose by 15, maybe 20 in some games still. I just don't think they'll get blown out by 30 or 40 in any of the games overall. Then the last one, UCF. That is one that could get interesting. KJ Jefferson and Gus Malzahn and what they're putting together down there with the Golden Knights, I think that they got a shot to be a really strong team this year. I think that there's a chance they can upset Utah. I do not think they're going to be a Big 12 contender. They can surprise me and do that, but that's a tough game to go play late in the season. If you're banged up, that's the one I could see a potential loss on. So either way I slice it, going back to this Utah team winning over 9.5 games, the most losses I currently see on Utah's schedule, barring, knock on wood, everyone do it with me wherever you're listening, barring health, or as long as they're healthy, I don't see a world where this team doesn't win at least 10 games. They're better than every team on their schedule. Yes, playing on the road can be challenging sometimes. The Oklahoma State game, not going to be easy. UCF could make things difficult. You get Colorado. Heck, there's some other, even a couple of home games, right? The Arizona game is one that at least gives you pause, like, oh, the Wildcats are Fafita. They've done some good things, beat us last year. In BYU, rivalry game, Iowa State, Matt Campbell has done a good job there. There are tough games on this schedule, but there's a reason Utah is the only team that's consistently in the Big 12 talked about being in the top 10, talked about being in the top 15. I went over it at the start. I think this roster is phenomenal. I think they're ready to win now. I think Kyle Whittingham and co are about to come into the Big 12 and win the conference in their first year. And I think their schedule sets them up to do that. They miss Kansas. You miss Kansas State here. There are some really strong to solid teams that Utah meets. There is no team that Utah has on their schedule that I see as a top 10 team. I don't see Oklahoma State as that. Top 20 team, I'll give them that. And same thing with all the other teams on there like that. Is there a chance they could maybe sweep into 20 to 15? Sure, but I don't see any of them being top 15 this fall. They could surprise us and do that, but I feel confident about this Utah football team's ability to win big road games this year because they don't see the elite quarterback play overall. Or if they do see elite quarterback, Shedeur Sanders, it's not as strong as those Washington and Oregon rosters have been in the past. So I feel good about this Utah team. I would bet over on the 9.5 wins, and I expect them to win most, if not all, of their big road games in 2024. And what's nice is if Utah does that, we're going to experience a similar championship feeling as we had to the Pac-12 championships games when Utah went back-to-back. And that was a feeling that I was reminded of last night. And I want to talk a little bit about just what that incredible feeling and everything that goes into it. Back to reminisce on winning those Pac-12 championships with all of you in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you today about one of the sponsors of our episode of Locked On Utes, who I mentioned already when we were talking about those win totals. It's FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on the spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You can visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. And that's locked on with capital L and O, all one word, locked on. You can visit FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook today. And man, there are so many great games or actions going on. Those of you watching on YouTube can see I'm all decked out in my Minnesota Timberwolves gear, fired up after their appearance in the Western Conference Final. First time they've gotten there in 2004. It's been literally forever since they've reached this point. So I'm fired up about them, and I like their chance against the Mavs. So obviously, I'm going to be looking into that game. How about across the way? Do you think the Celtics are just going to bounce the Pacers quickly, or can Indiana surprise everyone and make it a series? I think there's a lot of fun NBA action out there too, and that's without even mentioning all the NHL playoffs that are going on, MLB regular season, lots of great things in the world of sports, and you can get in on the action by visiting FanDuel.com to look at odds in all of your favorite sports today. All righty, close this one out with a little championship reminder of just that feeling and what makes it so great. So last night I was watching my Minnesota Timberwolves win the Western Conference semis against the Denver Nuggets to go to the Western Conference Finals against the Dallas Mavericks. And it was funny because while I'm watching this game, I just kept sitting there like, we can't actually win, right? Because they have Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, like all these things. And I know not all of you are NBA fans, so just bear with me. But like, it just didn't seem like the team from Minnesota that's had 3 number 1 draft picks since 2014, that has lived in just the dumpster fire organizations of the NBA for years. It just didn't seem like they were capable of going in and beating the 3-time MVP, the reigning MVP, just all of these. The odds were against them. The Wolves weren't supposed to beat the champions. Kind of like Utah back in their first Pac-12 championship run wasn't supposed to beat Oregon, right? Sure, they beat them once in the regular season, but this team had come up short in so many Pac-12 championship games before. My Wolves teams had come up short in playoff series in the past. So it's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to break through. You're not supposed to win win those, or it doesn't happen to your team because they've come up short so many times. That's what you tell yourself. You're nervous, so you're just watching like, we're going to blow it. Something's going to happen. And then they start to make plays, whether it's Anthony Edwards poking balls away and going in for dunks, or Devin Lloyd pick sixes, Tavion Thomas and Cam Rising making big plays offensively, Brant Keithy, Dalton Kincaid catching big passes. And then you're like, whoa, we're going to win. Like, you're looking at the clock. You're like, you're factoring in time. You're like, no, we can't blow this anymore. Like, we're going to win. We're going to be champions. And it's just, or not, I guess not champions for my Timberwolves. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. This is the first time I've been here with my Wolves, so give me a little grace. But just like that feeling of like, we can't do this. Like, that's not what we've done. And then you finally get over that hump. It's such a rewarding thing. Once again, the Timberwolves have won, since I've been a fan of them, like post 2004, they have won 2 playoff series. They both have come this year. Like, that's insanely awful for the NBA standards. By comparison, when the Nuggets won it last year, they won 4 playoff series. So like, that's how terrible the Timberwolves have been in the past. But they got over that hump, and it was one of those moments and experiences, and just the joy I felt in that moment watching them break through reminded me of watching Utah finally break through to win Pac-12 championships, break through to beat USC in that massive home game. And they've done that before, but that one just felt different and special, and being there in person, right? Especially just because with all the hype that Caleb Williams had around him, and to get him and then get him again, go back to back. Like, that's rare air when you go back to back as conference champions. And that's what Utah was able to do. So just watching my Minnesota Timberwolves with Anthony Edwards and Karl Towns find a way to get it done in the biggest moment come through reminded me of what it was like watching Utah for the first time come through in such a massive moment when the odds were stacked against them. And man, that is a great feeling that I hope we all get to share with Utah football this fall again, as hopefully they are Big 12 champions. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Utes. Appreciate all of you for hanging, especially those of you who stuck around for my Wolves/Utah championship feeling connection there like that. Really appreciate getting to do the show and talk Utah football and just sports in general with you guys, and can't wait to be back and do it tomorrow. Lots of fun stuff coming up. We got recruiting, looking ahead to the fall. We got to talk some Utah baseball and softball still too. It's a loaded week of Locked On Utes, even in May, and I look forward to seeing you right back here tomorrow.